All right, on today's podcast, we have a controversial subject to discuss, and I've got an expert here that's going to help us with this. But that is the blanket rezoning in Calgary. And I'm Rob Vanovermeire, and I've been selling real estate for a long time. And I've got Kathy Yuen here, and she's an architect.
Architectural technologist.
Right.
Yes.
So, I mean, you're real familiar with this, right, Kathy?
Yeah, we've been, so my company, Phase One Design, we've been in Calgary doing residential focused developments for the last 18 to 20 years.
18 to 20 years?
18 to 20 years, yeah. I'm running up to 20. We're 19, so.
So you've been knee deep in this controversial subject now, right? I mean, when the city announced that they were going to go to a blanket rezoning, I mean, what were your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. So my initial thoughts were, wow, this is going to change the face of the industry and just Calgary as a whole. I'm a born and raised Calgarian, and I love the city. I always will love the city. You know, it's my home. And yeah, I mean, zoning really drives what future development is going to be, as you know.
Right.
So we knew that there was going to be a lot of changes coming down the pipeline. I think much like everybody else in the city, not only in our industry, but like homeowners and residents alike, we didn't really know what exactly that was going to do to the face of the community. And I think even now, you know, fast forward, let's say, depending on when you measure the start date, like 12 to 18 months later, I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out, like, okay, what does this actually mean for the future of our city? And I think that's what we're going to dive into today.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right, because I will tell you, you know, as a real estate agent, of course, we want to see homes being sold. We want to see people get into real estate. I mean, that's really the dream of living in this country, is to own your own home.
Yeah.
But you got to be responsible.
Yes.
Because, you know, with every decision that is made on development, it does affect other people. And so this is why there's some controversy, right? And, even for me, I own a property in Altadore, and I've owned this property since 2002. You know, when I moved in there, it was all the old bungalows, right?
Yeah.
Everybody had big lots.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and there was lots of places to park. And fast forward to today, I mean, we got infills everywhere. Now we've got townhouses going up all over Altadore. Even driving in this morning, there's like 3 of them going up right now.
Yeah.
And I know what these issues are. I mean, I think it's the people who have lived there for a long time. Parking, the amount of traffic going in and out is a concern. And the this high density living is I guess in some degree is wreaking havoc on this. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I guess, should we talk about, like, what is it first? Do you want me to kind of dive into that first?
Yeah, well, what is high density?
Yeah, well, the blanket rezoning, really, what happened is May 14th of this year, May 14th of 2024, City Council voted in a blanket rezoning, which went into effect on August the 6th, later on in the year. So what that really meant is that most, if not all, of the residential zonings in Calgary were previously allowed for, let's say, a single family and, say, a duplex. I'll use those 2 as an example. That's the one that most people know about. Those properties could then be actually developed into, we call it higher density. So essentially you could put more houses and more units on one single lot. So, you know, kind of like on a very, very general level, that's what ended up happening.
Right.
Behind the scenes, though, there was also a lot of other changes in the zoning bylaw that also affected what you could and couldn't do. So, which I don't think anybody out there is really talking about. You know, there was changes to parking requirements, as an example, and the secondary suites, the carriage suites over garages. So even though, you know, I think there's a lot of conversation about the RCG rezoning in Calgary specifically, that was just one out of like 10 other items that actually also got approved.
So the bottom line is now, I mean, everything's changed. And so any community, you correct me if I'm wrong, but any community in Calgary, if I've got the right size lot, I could potentially redevelop it.
Yes, would be the short answer. I think, again, what's not talked about as much is that there are different pathways to get there. Like, there's different approval processes that you need to do depending on the development. I won't go into the technical bylaw because I will put everybody to sleep. But again, I think, the blanket rezoning as a whole, it's very complex. There's lots of different layers to it. I think the biggest thing though, the takeaway right now, what is it, November, December, so we're a few months after it actually happened. I think we can both agree, like, it's been so controversial. And, maybe we can just be like, 1, 2, 3, go. You share your thoughts first and I can share mine, because I think there's, at risk of, I'm not taking a side, but I'm saying, there's probably a better side to it. There's the pros and cons, I guess.
Yeah, there is, because look, every time there's a decision made, especially trying to address affordable housing, trying to address a higher density living, like you said, it will come with pros and cons. It just does, right?
100%.
But the city has to move forward. We have to address the fact. I was just at a presentation up in Edmonton with the chief officer for stats with the Canadian Real Estate Association.
Okay, yeah.
And he brought some interesting stats. We've had an unbelievable amount of migration into Canada.
100%.
Right,
yeah.
And if you think about it for a moment, all these people that are coming here from other countries, the dream is to own a home.
Yeah.
And we have, right now we've got purpose-built properties being built, which is also
for rentals.
Yeah. Which we're not getting the availability of those going into home ownership, which is tightening the inventory, the high demand of people, and again the affordability issue. So I know what the city of Calgary is trying to do with this blanket rezoning. They're trying to find some sort of a solution.
100%,
to this, right?
Yeah, and you nailed it. Like, I think really at the end of the day, that's what the city is trying to do. I am of the belief personally that there's never going to be a perfect solution, right? Like, I think there will likely be iterations of what the solution may be, whether or not it includes blanket rezoning. That's a whole separate thing. But yeah, affordability is and has always been an issue in housing. Like, this is something I'm very, very passionate about. Like, I love affordable housing and the concept of it, and I love the fact that I can be part of this solution, as part of my everyday job. But then on the flip side, we are continuously engaging with community associations. Literally, the meeting I had before this, I was on the line with a community association as part of one of our development permit applications. And really, we just want to hear what they had to say about, these types of developments under the new blanket rezoning coming into their communities. And oftentimes they have very valid concerns. Yeah. Right? And, I would probably have the same concerns too if that was my next door neighbor. And they're asking me questions, like, what is the impact of shadowing? What is the privacy impact? How do we deal with parking? How do you deal with waste recycling? Like, these are all very good questions. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution or answer to any of those questions. I think from my perspective of doing this for so long, I've been in the industry, I'm dating myself now, over 20 years. I've been running phase one design for almost 19 years now. And, from my perspective of that experience, but then also loving affordable housing, I think you can have both. Right. As long as you're doing, these larger scale developments in a responsible way. And I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think it's like intentional design. And even like going into a community, it's like, okay, like let's kind of look at what's around us and, let's be mindful of privacy. Like, how do we position windows, things like that. I mean, the list is very long. I won't get into the details of that, but I think that it's really a balance that we need to maintain of, respecting the existing communities, but realizing that the world, not just Calgary, I mean, the world really like needs a change and a shift towards being able to have more affordable housing accessible to everybody.
That's right. So I think let's talk about the flip side of things, because on the flip side, there are some, I see the positives, and I mean, and I'm living in the world of, because I'm constantly working with people buying real estate, selling real estate, getting feedback from people that they're leaving a neighborhood because they don't like what's going on in the neighborhood, and I get the feedback, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you definitely would.
I do. The good, the bad, and the ugly, right? But on the flip side, the good thing is, when you look at if you go into an older community, the school's already there, the transit is already there. We don't have to build roads. We don't. and that is a tax savings as well, right? Because that's another side of the coin that we're all mindful of. Calgary does have among the lowest property tax in all of Canada for a major city, and we should be proud of that actually, that we have that, and of course we want to maintain that. So that's part of the flip side of doing it, but also let's talk about real estate values. We also have a lot of people in these older neighborhoods that have lived there for many years, and maybe they've reached a point where they are ready to live in a different neighborhood. And with redevelopment, the property value may have gone up, and that maybe gives them the ability to afford a property in a different location, put some money in the bank, maybe towards a
I have
retirement.
a question about that.
Yeah.
So, I think this is true, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is it true that if you're in an area that has like a lot of redevelopment, like it's kind of a no-brainer, your property value is going to go up, right?
Your
right?
property value
More or
goes
less.
up?
Yeah. Like if you're in an area that's like transitioning, redeveloping, and taking the controversial piece like aside, like let's just take that off the table for a second.
Yeah.
But just as a general statement, that's true, right?
Yeah.
So, like to your point, it does help any of the residents that are living there in terms of like property values.
Yeah, I mean, let's take a quick example. I mean, you could say you've got a 1958 bungalow, and and you're sitting on the right lot, and you've reached that age where hey, we could live anywhere.
Yes.
And and the land you're sitting on has become worth quite a bit of money because it can be done for redevelopment. And you can now sell and pick your choice. Maybe a condominium's an option, maybe a townhouse is an option, or maybe just moving to suburbia yourself because you're retired, you don't have to drive to the office downtown. These are all the options you have available, right?
Choices, You know what's another really interesting one we just ran into where a client came to us and he owned a lot in a community that he's lived in since he was a kid. Like he grew up in this community, which I thought was really cool. So his dream was to actually, so he has this lot, not the one he lives on, but this was a separate lot. And he decided to, under the new blanket rezoning, build a multifamily development.
Right.
But the reason why he wanted to do it, he actually, it was really cool because he kind of had this long-term plan. So he has a young son now, and he wanted to do it because he's looking around him and he's like, there's no way my kid is going to be, affording anything anytime soon. And no offense, I love my son, but I don't want him to live with me until he's like 30 years old. So he was like in his head, he was actually building this building. So like so he could actually like put his son in there, like as he grew older.
Right.
And then also like as him and his wife aged, then they could actually have one of their caregivers, so they could stay in their own home that they live in right now in the community, but then have their caregiver live close by, but then have like accommodations close by. And then he also was of the mindset that, there's probably other families in his community that were in that same segment of life, right? Where like that's a consideration. So I thought that was like a really cool perspective. I never actually thought of that. So.
It just goes to what you say. It's about options. I mean, you have a lot of options with this. So you could embrace this this blanket rezoning and look at the various different options.
Yeah.
I mean, even some have even gone with the laneway home too.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean,
those
I was involved in working with a developer recently that person is going to live in the laneway home. They're going to rent their house out.
Oh, okay.
Right, and live in a laneway home, which is in Lake Bonavista.
Okay.
Oh
wow.
Which is who would have ever thought Lake Bonavista would even be looking at a laneway home, right?
Right.
So and that's a controversial neighborhood because
100%. Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. And I think it's interesting when you say that, Rob. So we, Phase One Design, we also have an office in Vancouver, and we've been operating in Vancouver as well since 2015. And I will say it's interesting to look at that market because since we opened our office there, and even before that, the standard in Vancouver, when you, let's just say, zoning aside, if you were to, let's say to me, hey Kathy, I want to design and build my dream custom home, there's two things that normally always come with that custom home. Right out of the gate, there's always the secondary suite that's in the basement.
Right.
And there's always a laneway house.
Right.
And even if there was not a laneway house that client intended on building right away, there's always a conversation about, okay, well, in the future, if I were to build this, what would that look like? Let's plan our parking and our site appropriately so we can add that. And then the secondary suite in the basement, even, again, if they didn't have any intention on renting it or using it as a suite, almost, I would say 99% of the homes that we design there would at the very least have it roughed in. So what that would mean is they would use the basement themselves, right? They would live in the main house, but then use the basement themselves like on a day-to-day,
Right.
but then have it roughed in. So very easily they could put the door in, and they already have the outside access where they could actually easily convert it into a suite. So my point is that there's examples of that type of development, like not necessarily the controversial fourplexes, but like the higher density where you have more than one unit on a single family site, right? So that's been happening for years and years and years in Vancouver, right?
Yeah, it has been. I mean, that's been around for a very, very long
Totally.
time. And this is why, it's a newer concept in Calgary. People are trying to get their head around it. We've really, lived in this, kind of a detached home type of a city,
Yeah.
For a very long time.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we're thrown into this, blanket rezoning and all these different options. And there's no question, people are trying to get their head around this. As
Of
to,
course, yeah.
what is the right course of action? Is the city taking the right course of action? But at the end of the day, I guess depending what side of the fence you're on, we have to address the fact that we need more housing.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I will also say, I do empathize with a lot of, the comments out there that are like, yeah, you know what? This development does not look good. It's way too big. And you know what? You see examples of bad developments. Actually, to be honest, I'm probably the biggest judge of like developments and buildings. You drive by a building, you're like, oh, what did they do that? Why did they do that?
Yeah.
But try not to judge. But my point is, there's examples of good development and well-designed buildings, and then there's also on the flip side of the coin always going to be like poorly designed and like what I think is not like good development, right? So yeah.
I mean, you're right. I mean, we saw even evidence of that even in the infill market. I mean, for a while there, there were people that have never built a house before, didn't know anything about development, all of a sudden bought a lot and said, I'm going to build 2 infills. We saw some really poor designs there, and actually poor construction.
Yes.
So that's been a concern.
Yeah.
I think at least we're finding with the development of like the 4 and 5 townhouse type of a product, you generally are getting more reputable builders there that I'm seeing. Generally, I'll say generally. There's a few that are probably questionable.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think just as long as you have a good solid team, it's like even with the single family stuff, right? Same thing I preach to all of our clients all day long is like just make sure you have the right team, like right design team, so they understand like what should actually go into the community, and then also the builder as well. I think a lot of people too, I don't know if you want to talk about the CMHC MLI Select program at all.
We should talk about that.
Okay.
I mean, because, I think if you're watching this podcast, and you're potentially sitting on a lot, and you gotta have to look at your options, right? Because and you should look at the options. I mean, right or wrong, whatever side you're on, you should consider your options, and that is the option of using the bank's money to maybe finance a project.
Yeah, high level, this may change because obviously programs change all the time, but at the time of filming this, the CMHC MLI Select program allows builders and developers to basically get a loan up to 95%, 5% LTV, loan to value, on a 50-year amortization. There's a few different ways you can qualify, but the one that we see that's very popular is if you're building a density of 5 units or more on one single parcel. So, and of course there's qualification requirements, and there's more detail. I mean, I'm sure we can talk more about that. If someone's actually interested, we won't bore everybody else. But I think that has actually spurred a lot of interest in the affordable housing sector, and like the rental market, right?
Yeah, because just talking about options. So if you were sitting on a lot like this, maybe your house is paid off. You could literally finance the entire build construction, and you could partner up with a developer. You could do it yourself. There's, like I said, there's lots of options, but you can use the bank's money on this program if you qualify. So these, again, this is just all about options. It's all about considering what's available. And I have to say, maybe to get towards a conclusion of this, but I think blanket rezoning, it was a good move from the city, I think overall. there's no question. I mean, for those of you that are in areas and pockets where you might be looking at me going, no, I don't agree with that. I feel for you, because I do think there are some areas, you know, I mean, you look at Lake Bonavista is one of them, you know, people bought into that community,
Totally.
never expecting to see high density, right?
Yeah, and I you know, I don't want to be controversial, but I will share like some of my own personal opinion. I believe that affordable housing, there needs to be more of it. And the mechanism with which to get there that the city used was the blanket rezoning. I don't know that I 100% agree necessarily with the mechanism, right? And maybe the blanket rezoning was the right thing to do, but perhaps in a different way. And what I mean by that is, you know, yes, we need to build more housing, but we need to do it in a responsible manner. Right. So how do we get there? And I don't know the answer to that question. That's like way above my pay grade. And if I knew the answer, I'd probably be.
Well, believe me, I was I was at government liaison days.
Yeah.
Daniel Smith was there. Nahid Nemshi was there.
Yeah.
We had
everyone's trying to figure it out.
MLAs were there. I
Yeah.
mean, and I tell you, this was 500 real estate agents in this room, and it was very controversial.
Oh, for sure,
Yes.
100%.
And so you're right. The you know, our government officials are trying to find a way forward. And it was good they had this event, because they're listening to our voice and hearing the concerns. But decisions have to be made, and I think whatever decision they make, somebody is going to be affected negatively.
100%.
Somebody will be affected
Yes.
positively.
Yes. Yeah,
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So, just to finish off on talking about blanket rezoning, just one thing, maybe you can clarify this. It doesn't mean that if the property you're sitting on just arbitrarily can be rezoned, right?
Well, you can, what it does mean right now anyway, there may be changes coming up here pretty quick, but yeah, right now it means that you can build higher density. So what that means is like more units, right?
Right.
That doesn't mean you have to do that. Since the blanket rezoning, we have had, I would say, a good majority of our clients come to us and say, no, I still want to build a single family home. Or, you know, maybe it's a single family home. Oh, now I can do a suite. Maybe you'll think about doing that. Like those kind of conversations are still happening.
Right.
So I don't think it necessarily means that, you know, I mean, it can happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just going to go onto a block and just see like fourplex after fourplex all day long, right? That's not what that means.
No.
I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, you are, because what I'm saying is there's certain things you can do on each lot. I mean, some lots are not big enough to do a fourplex.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So right now, as it stands, the way that you actually calculate how many units you can do, it is actually based on your lot size, among other things, which I won't get into. But usually, it's like your size, your lot dimensions, your parking, like can you fit everything physically on the site? So it's a very technical like exercise that my team and I go through in order to assess that.
Gotcha. Perfect. So that's why when you're talking about weighing out options, believe me, you need the right team, as Kathy said, and you know, this is what Kathy does. This is the world she lives in, and believe me, if you have further questions for Kathy, you can reach out to her. Certainly, for me, some people, I'm in the business of helping people acquire these properties. I'm in the business of helping them, you know, to sell these properties. You know, so I'm not too much involved in the development side of things, but certainly on having conversations around, you know, buying and selling of these properties as well, and getting people's feedback. So. But between the two of us, we're quite well connected when it comes to blanket rezoning. We know all of the right people in the right places. If you have deep further questions about this, so Kathy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks
today.
for having me.
Yes, it was fantastic.
Yeah, we'll have to keep this.
I'm having you again.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, thanks for this conversation. I'm like, oh my god, do I really want to share my opinion? But I actually do. Like, all joking aside, I think this is a very important conversation to have. You know, and like I do genuinely want to know, like, what does everybody else think? I mean,
it's
important.
It's an ongoing conversation.
It really is.
And and believe me, this is going to change. Like, I think every quarter you might see changes around this, and we'll have to have this conversation again. So let us know your opinion down below in the comments. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.